Hi, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. Welcome to this edition of Red Talk. My name is Diana, and I'm the comms coordinator at IFRC. Today, I'm here with three guests so far. A fourth will be joining us very soon. And we will be talking about mainly COP27, the outcomes, what they mean for climate vulnerable countries, and what are the lessons we can take from the ongoing responses on the ground. One of the outcomes of COP27 is the final pledges made on loss and damage for the most vulnerable countries for climate change. However, we're all talking about recovery from past disasters. Disasters around the world continue to happen on a daily basis. Only for you to give you an idea, the IFRC's risk watch system put out alerts for 74 national disasters all around the world in the past 2 weeks. We're talking about tropical storms, wildfires, floods, and food insecurity that continue to claim lives and damage thousands of hectares, displacing and threatening the most vulnerable communities, their ability to meet their most basic needs. So this is what we will be discussing today. I will, instead of introducing our guests, I will let them introduce themselves. So maybe we can start with the one to my right on my screen. Kristen, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Kirsten Hagen, and I'm actually based in Geneva with the IFRC, and I'm part of our policy and diplomacy team. So I've been leading a lot of our work engaging with the UNFCCC negotiations and also supporting our delegation to come to Egypt and engage in the processes there. Good to meet you all.
Thank you, Kristen. Joel, maybe you want to have a go?
Thank you very much. Joel Kitutu is my name, and I'm the manager of PPP project, that is Pilot Programmatic Partnership in Uganda, and I support the EPR component under DRM. I'm glad to be in this forum.
Thank you, Joel. Maybe later you can explain us a lot of these acronyms that some of the audience might not be familiar with. Yes, in the conversation, I would ask you to maybe explain a bit what we are referring to. Antonio?
Yes, good morning from me to everyone. I'm Antonio. I'm the regional delegate for Italian Red Cross based in Santo Domingo and covering the Central America and the Caribbean region. Glad to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Ando, thanks for joining. Nice to see you here. Maybe you are having some connections, but we would love for you to introduce yourself. No, maybe Ando, can you hear us?
Yes. Ando, can you hear us? Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Ambigena Ratsimamanga, the Secretary General of Malagasy Red Cross.
We're having some difficulties with the sound. Maybe Ando, if you turn on the camera, maybe it will help. We can try maybe a bit later. Certainly, we would love to have Madagascar on board, and she's a great speaker. So certainly, it would be amazing to have Ando now, but we can go back to her afterwards because we wanted to start talking about COP in itself. The event finished last weekend, at the very early times of Sunday, late Saturday. And Kristen, you were there on the ground following the negotiations very closely. So we would like to hear more about it, your observations on the summit, the outcomes, and how it has been perceived by IFRC.
Sure. So I think in terms of how the COP went, it's been a little bit of a mixed bag. I think there's been some definite successes, but also some disappointments. The COP this year was framed as an implementation COP, as an African COP, and as a loss and damage COP. And I think loss and damage is the piece that this COP will be known for. So when we talk about losses and damages, we're talking about the impacts of climate change on people, on ecosystems, on communities, on infrastructure, on economies, you name it. So the impacts that are actually affecting our lives. We talk about economic and non-economic losses and damages, but to be frank, those called non-economic are really human and ecosystem related and biodiversity related losses and damages. So for example, a loss of a coral reef is something that will lead to massive food insecurity, will change lives and livelihoods, and it's very hard to put a tangible amount on. Losses of lives, losses of livelihoods, all of these things are losses and damages. And for us in the humanitarian sector, what we've been dealing with for many years already has been the losses and damages that are caused by climate change, and in particular by climate and weather related extreme events. So where we really progressed at this COP was, first of all, loss and damage was on the formal agenda, and it's not actually been part of the formal agenda before. So this was already a significant step forward. But secondly, countries came together and actually agreed on the need for new and additional financing for addressing loss and damage. So when a loss and damage has already occurred, what is it we need to do about it? Whilst recognizing that the more we can put into averting and minimizing loss and damage, or through to climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, the less loss and damage will actually occur. And so those remain incredibly important. And this brings me on to some of the, I guess, disappointments of the COP. So while we did see the progress around loss and damage in terms of the fund, in terms of the operationalization of what's called the Santiago Network on Loss and Damage, which is meant to provide really critical technical assistance, where we didn't get as far as we hoped for was around the ambition to reduce emissions. And this is absolutely critical, because the more emissions, the more likely we are to go over a global temperature rise of 1.5 degrees. The more we go over a global temperature rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius, the more we're going to see extreme weather events, sea level rise, and increases in losses and damages. So it's really important, if we're actually caring about reducing potential losses and damages and of course responding to them, that we really need to also be investing in this mitigation piece. And that's where, to be frank, parties around the world didn't really step up to the plate. The final piece, I think, in terms of the IFRC perspective, is they called this an implementation COP. But to be frank, COP is where the talking takes place. In terms of the implementation, that is what is happening in countries right now, was happening during the COP, and will happen after the COP. And this is where we really need to focus on what is it we can do to implement the decisions that took place at the COP. How can we really scale up the investment in mitigation, in adaptation, in every piece that we can do to reduce and then respond to loss and damage? And for us, the critical piece, and what we think can be really transformational, is around investing in locally led adaptation action. So we're seeing communities engaged and leading on the adaptation needs of their own community as the most essential way that we can really reduce potential losses and damages. And I'm really happy to talk more to the different outcomes of the different negotiation streams if that's of interest to people later on. Thanks.
Sure. So far, we have people watching from all over the world: Sweden, Georgia, Bangladesh, Nigeria. So I'm pretty sure maybe there's some questions coming from the audience, from this global audience afterwards. So thanks, Kristen, for your views. Ando, I know you were at COP as well. I don't know whether you have anything to add regarding the outcomes of the summit, but we were really eager to hear more about you both, Ando and Joel, since you are both based on countries that are highly vulnerable to climate change and that might be eligible for these funds. How this decision has been perceived in your countries and by your communities, working very closely with the affected communities on the ground.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. As Kirsten mentioned, earlier regarding the resolution. It's interesting to hear about the amount of money that is going to be invested in loss and damages, including all the aspect of preparedness. From the perspective of Madagascar, I don't hear yet how much will go to Madagascar, but as a local actors on the ground, we already a preparedness system in place. For example, we work closely with meteorological department for dissemination of message of weather forecast and warnings to remote communities in a simple language with low-cost materials like bells or drums, that people take protective action to reduce the impact of disaster. In addition to that, also as part of a preparedness, because we all know that preparedness is important to save lives and livelihoods. Apart from that, we help local authorities to evacuate people at most risk beforehand, and we proposition essential relief items. These blocks of activity we are implementing regularly as part of preparedness for every upcoming cyclone season. And that's what we did also when we faced the back-to-back cyclone we faced this year. And we really hope that this resolution from COP is an opportunity if my country have the opportunity to benefit from that amount, to scale up this system at community level, and to really reinforce the collaboration with a meteorological department in order that all important information regarding warning is reached to the most vulnerable. Apart from that, also, we have a current program, pilot partnership, that goes around all aspects of preparedness, in which we really adopt the approach of people at the center, in which Malagasy Red Cross engage community in identifying the risk, what they face, understanding of the root cause of vulnerability, and come up with an action plan from the community according to their capacity, how they respond as they reveal the risk, how they reduce the risk, and then, as I mentioned, it come up with a local, small-scale mitigation action, and also, for example, a process to watch and monitor risk. And we are developing also a contingency plan, and not only at Malagasy Red Cross level, but at community level, following for effective honing of simulation exercise. And finally, we are conducting now a feasibility study on a forecast-based financing for flood to anticipate, and this process is ensuring that financing mechanisms are available immediately when trigger is met. And we really hope that it will align with the resolution of this funding from COP27. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ando.
And of course,
This is
sorry about that.
No, what's going on with
What's going on with the
yeah, now it's good. These things happen. Of course, this is a discussion, so if at any time, I know you're all very knowledgeable about what we are talking about today. So yeah, if at any time you want to jump in and ask each other questions or compliment on what's being said, please go ahead. I highly value, and I'm sure our audience will as well value your comments. Thanks, Ando. These were excellent examples of what's going on in the ground to prepare and take action. Joel, do you want to also give us your perspective on Uganda? How were the decisions made at COP received, and what is Uganda doing on the ground in terms of preparedness and disaster preparedness? Wait, I think you're now.
Thank you very much. Not very different from the previous presenter. In Uganda, we are doing a lot of preparedness work around anticipatory action, and we are looking at the outcome of the COP27 as good news for us, because if there is funding now towards preparedness, and that is the paradigm shift from response to preparedness, it is a good thing for us. Also aligning with the PPP, you did say that we'll dive deep to understand this acronym, but it's about accelerating local action for humanitarian and health crisis. We are doing a lot with the districts. For us, we are focusing on supporting the local authorities there to be able to strengthen their mechanism in preparing for these disasters through anticipatory action. So our work is around supporting the district disaster management committees to be able to come up with their district multi-hazard contingency plans, because Uganda is experiencing multiple hazards. As I speak now, we do have Ebola, EVD. We have a response from IFRC. We have hydromet response in the eastern part of Uganda, and we also have population movement, people on the move. So PPP action for us is good, and looking at what is coming out of COP27, we are really aligned to the outcome of the COP27 and looking forward to tapping into some of these resources to be able to support the local communities. We have a belief in Uganda that we can get help from out, but over time we need to build capacity as a country, and especially supporting the local structures to be able to prepare better so that the stress of response is reduced. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Yes. So thanks for discussing PPP. So the pilot programmatic partnership with the European Union that is working both in Madagascar and Uganda on disaster risk preparedness and many other pillars. Antonio, I think you can also talk more about what we're doing on the ground and under this framework. So you implement also the same project in your region, Central America. Correct me if I'm wrong. Could you tell us more about the role of the European national societies, like the Italian Red Cross, in this local crisis, and why the European Union adopted a partnership approach with the movement, with the Red Cross movement? Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Diana. And I'm really glad to hear the speech from the colleagues around the world, because this actually demonstrates that we are aligned, as Joel was saying, we are aligned with the COP27 outcomes. Basically, the idea of the PPP in general is to take global challenges, but at the same time finding local response or local solution to this problem. And as Italian Red Cross, we are supporting the national society, three national societies in Central America, namely Honduras, El Salvador, and South America, Ecuador, in this disaster risk reduction pillar. And that's why we're working together with the national societies, accompanying them once while canalizing funds from European Union, but as well providing technical support to the national society. Just a small example, while we are talking here, there are a few of my colleagues flying from Rome to Quito, Ecuador, to provide technical support to the national society to ameliorate their capacity to manage risks. And the most important part that could relate to COP27 is actually the greening response that we had in greening response part of the PPP project, meaning that we are trying to minimize the impact of the response of the Red Cross national societies using tools from Federation, which is basically standardized, called NIT+, which allow us to evaluate the emissions, if we would say, or the impact on climate change of our activities. And meanwhile, few of the national societies in Central America are actually evaluating themselves to try to minimize their impact while responding to natural disasters. Of course, as we know, natural disasters in Latin America and Central America are quite different, from volcanoes to hurricanes to flooding and flash floodings. And of course, we should consider also the Caribbean part of the Latin America, of the Americas as such, which is suffering more and different challenges due to climate change. So the idea is basically to take this important global challenge and find local solution in order to facilitate and localize the response. Because the trend, as our colleagues from COP27 were saying, is to localize, to minimize the impact that we can have. And of course, our movement is one of the most prone actors in doing so, because we have the possibility to take action at global level, as we are discussing now, but as well to take action at local level, as we have been doing so far and we are continuing to do. So this is basically the role of a national society from EU here in the Caribbean or in Central America or in all the territories involved in PPP.
And can you maybe talk about like the reasons of like doing a partnership? What is implied in case in terms of like the workflow, or what advantages does it bring?
Well, the first, let's say, advantage that we can have from a long-standing partnership such as PPP is the continuity of the actions. Because so far we have been working under a scheme that was more concerned about the funds, the fact that each year or each period of project we should have designed a new project to go on with the activities. Whereas with the PPP project, which has a long projection and a long-standing partnership, we can have continuity of funds available, so continuity of actions. And at the same time, we are really joining together. I mean, we are strengthening our capacity to work together, not only as a partner or national society, but as a movement as such. Because the PPP, we don't have to forget that the PPP is actually involving at the moment IFRC, EU National Society, and local national society or also national societies, which means that basically it's the whole movement moving towards the response that we need to these problems.
Thanks, Antonio. So it's been so good to hear so many voices from the field that are very close to the projects that we implement in countries where we operate. Kirsten, after having heard these testimonies, are you hopeful about what we are doing? What do you think? What else could be done as like maybe closing statement, and then we'll open to the floor maybe to see whether there are questions from the audience.
Sure. So I think one of the messages that I'm hearing coming through from colleagues is the importance of preparedness and of early warning and early action. And one thing that was actually notable in terms of this COP was that early warning and early action was actually quite high on the agenda. So not only did we have the launch of the UN Secretary General's Early Warning for All initiative, but actually the final text of what is being called the Sharm el-Sheikh Implementation Plan, which is like the cover text for all of the other agreements that were negotiated, specifically mentions early warning systems. And so I think this is a really important recognition of how important those early warning systems are in terms of saving lives and in terms of minimizing losses and damages. So I think that that's one really strong takeaway, and where we need to be thinking how IFRC as a whole and how national societies working with communities, working with governments can really scale up that work in order to dramatically save lives and to reduce losses and damages. I think there's an important piece here also that Ando mentioned around the importance of climate finance. And we've recently released a report
which is called Where It Matters Most, Climate Financing for the Hardest Hit. And a few of the things that we found when we did our research was, first of all, there are a significant number of countries that are actually getting left behind and are not getting the climate finance that they need. And that means they're also not getting the investment in early warning systems, in climate adaptation, in disaster risk reduction, all the things that can actually prevent losses and damages from occurring. So I think there's a real need to shift and look at the finance and see who's getting left out, where does it need to go. We also looked at whether or not the finance is getting to the local level, and often that's a real challenge. So while there might be finance, for example, for big infrastructure projects that are super important in terms of climate adaptation, too often it's a smaller amount of money that is needed at the local level that will make a massive difference, but it's often not getting there. So there is a big piece around reaching the vulnerable communities. Then there's also just a piece around the volume of what is needed. And when signing up to the Paris Agreement, developed countries agreed to mobilize at least 100 billion of climate finance for developing countries each year until 2025. That hasn't happened. Every single year, that promise has fallen short. There was also a commitment to have 50% adaptation, 50% mitigation. Again, that's fallen short, and we're seeing significantly less investment in adaptation that we need. Now, some of the recent reports that came out just before COP said that what we're really needing is around $2 trillion. So clearly, there is a massive leap in investment that is needed. And from our side, where we've been looking at this specific piece of funding for loss and damages, if there is a failure to invest in climate adaptation, we are expecting then that by 2050, we're going to need $29 billion a year just for the immediate humanitarian response for climate and extreme weather-related events. And this is only in the context where international support is needed. So it's not including everything that comes after humanitarian response, the whole long-term recovery and building back better. It's not including all those other places in the world that maybe don't need international assistance, but where human beings are being really hard hit by the climate crisis. So we've got a really long way to go. And I think the one piece that for me is really vital is that there needs to be investment, there needs to be now and at scale across all of the different pieces of the continuum, from mitigation, so reducing the greenhouse gas emissions so things don't get as bad as they could, adaptation so that we are managing the risks that are already out there, that's already baked in with a certain amount of climate change and already happening with existing climate and weather-related events, and then also the piece for addressing losses and damages. And all of these are critical, and we can't miss out on investing in each of those. And that also means acting and implementing at the local level.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. These are really wise words, and I think maybe some of the stakeholders or donors that might be watching us take good notes of your words, and we see more of the kind of partnerships that we're implementing and at the same scale or even bigger. So with these words, unless Antonio, Joel, you want to say anything, I don't think we have any questions from the audience. So please go ahead if you want to conclude.
Yes, thank you very much, Diana. I was just following the discussion that Kristen was mentioning about the 50% on adaptation and 50% of mitigation compromise that has been taken, which seems to be at the ground level an important and relevant achievement, because we are all the time focusing on one of them, leaving behind the other side of the coin. Because we have to remember that adaptation is the other side of the coin of mitigation, and is not sufficient to take actions towards mitigation, if not towards adaptation too. Because people are suffering now, and somehow they should adapt at the moment on what's going on. But by mitigation, we will actually support the new activities on the long run. So I think that these two important parts has to be underlined and has to be considered as the double side of the same coin. That was just my reflection about, and I'm really glad that COP27 has taken this kind of compromise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonio. Joel, do you want to conclude maybe, or Ando? I see that Ando just joined us. Ando, we're wrapping it up. We're coming close to the end, but if you want to say the final words, anything you want to add?
Thank you, Diana. No, just I'm going to be short. It's time not to take action. There is a lot of discussion during COP27. There is a lot of resolution, but it's time now to really put it in practice in order for the local actors can really perform the work at local level and to really reduce the impact of the climate change at individual, at community level. Thank you.
Yes, I've just chipped in to also give a parting shot. For us in Uganda, we are now at Uganda Red Cross Society deliberately taking the green response into implementing it through the action, the PPP action. We are developing a green response policy, and we are ensuring that each and every action that we are taking is geared towards green response. So we are looking forward to implementing an action that is cognizant of the fact that we need to fight the negative impacts of climate change. That is my parting shot. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's been a privilege to moderate this panel. I'm really lucky for the guests that joined today, and I think it's been a fantastic discussion. We will be having more of this, so stay tuned and talk to you soon. Thank you all for joining very much. I truly appreciate it. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.